So going on to another clip that I saw that was pretty interesting. It kind of didn't get that much attention, but Biden's Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, who's the first black man to be appointed to the Secretary of Defense, just a few months back, you had mainstream media that was hyping him up. They were like, oh man, the first black man in Secretary of Defense, we're making change from inside, a seat at the table, da 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 da. And now we're seeing revelations, and here we're going to listen to a quick interview where he admits that he was the one who recommended and suggested that Biden carry out that airstrike. And so it's just a perfect example of intersectional imperialism, of how the Democrats will use branding, right? They'll use tokens and people of color in their administration to carry out the agenda of imperialism, but use a person of color as a prop to avoid any sort of criticism. And so let's just quickly go to that clip.
We're very deliberate about our approach, as you would expect us to be. We allowed and encouraged the Iraqis to investigate and develop intelligence, and that was very helpful to us in refining the target. And let me just finally say that I'm really proud of the men and women in our force who carried out the strike. As you would expect, they performed in a very professional manner, and we're grateful for their service.
Can you say why this was important to do, Mr. Secretary, and was this your recommendation?
It was my recommendation. As we said a number of times, we will respond on our timeline. And once again, we wanted to be sure that of the connectivity and wanted to be sure that we had the right targets.
When did the president authorize the strikes? When did the president authorize the strikes? Were you on the phone with him?
It was today, yes.
It was today. Was it this morning? Did you bring late?
Yes, it was this morning.
When were you
So there he is, the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, admitting that he was the one who recommended the airstrikes to Biden, saying himself, like, I promoted this, I was the one who said that we should do this. And again, it shows the limits of liberalism, the limits of identity politics, the limits of this idea that it's just a matter of getting the quote unquote right person at the table. Nick, what do you think about this and just intersectional imperialism in general?
Yeah, it's a huge thing, this intersectional imperialism, this identity politics, masking of imperialism and capitalism. Some people on the left want to pretend like it's not important, and why are you talking about this? Why are you criticizing why are you only criticizing, like sometimes they'll say, why are you only criticizing people of color in power? Why are you only criticizing women in power? And they don't realize that it's not just like a little thing here and there. This is like a real push by imperialism and they've been doing it for a long, long time, but it's just really obvious now, especially with Biden, that they're trying to, just have like a more diverse imperialism, the same oppressive system that oppresses people throughout the world in this country, but just have a few more diverse face to it. And the reason they do it is it's not about, they'll say it's inclusion. It shows that everyone has a right to have a seat at the table, but that's not what it is. It's not what it is. It's just about making imperialism more effective. That way, when they go and attack some African country, they could say, oh, look, we're not white supremacists because look, we have this black guy who's bombing you. Or if it's they're attacking some Arab country, they could say, oh, we're not the Crusaders or whatever. We have this Muslim person doing it, so we're here to help you. It's just to have a more effective imperialism, and it really is. I would say that it is basically the dominant form of imperialism at this point. The Trump form of imperialism, like the more old-fashioned type of I guess you could say like American nationalist type stuff. That's really very, very weak and go this more CIA type, Obama type identity politics masking of imperialism, because it's much more effective for them.
Yeah, definitely. The color revolution style imperialism is the dominant form, and I think people have to recognize that, especially people on the left. I think it's something that is not really recognized. Shout out to everybody in the chat, by the way, Falcone General, Dust James, Bone Dance. If y'all have any questions, comments, please write them in the chat. This is intended to be interactive, so if y'all want to ask Comrade Nick something as well, go ahead and throw something in there. Bone Dance said, "Ugh, I hear that all the time, re-attacking people of color." Yeah, we get that all the time. Like, as anti-imperialists, people are like, "Oh, like, but she's a woman, but, you know, they're a person of color." And it's like, okay, they're a prop, they're a token, they're still carrying out the orders of imperialism. They're still carrying out the orders of Washington and Wall Street. And I think one of the shows that has played an interesting role in that approach, right, this new postmodern liberal imperialist approach, is Democracy Now!, Amy Goodman. And now we're going to go into a clip of her talking with Noam Chomsky, whose voice is annoying as fuck, by the way, because he could be so quiet and boring. If you want to fall asleep, just listen to a Noam Chomsky lecture. You'll fall right asleep. But it's interesting because these are people who are quote unquote on the left, right? And they're talking so much crap about Assad, about Syria, completely following the State Department line. And so this is from a few years back, them talking about Assad.
Here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We turn now to Noam Chomsky, one of the world's best-known dissidents. His Institute Professor Emeritus at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he taught for more than 50 years. Juan Gonzalez and I spoke to him live on Democracy Now! In Tuesday's program. After the broadcast, we continued the conversation. I asked him to talk about the situation in Syria, as well as the broader Middle East.
Syria is a horrible catastrophe. The Assad regime is a moral disgrace. They're carrying out horrendous acts, the Russians with them.
Why the Russians with them?
Pretty simple reason. Syria is their one ally in the whole region. Not a close ally, but they do have their one Mediterranean base is in Syria. It's the one country that's more or less cooperated with them, and they don't want to lose their one ally. It's very ugly, but that's what's happening. Meanwhile, there have been, it's kind of like the North Korean case we were discussing. There have been possible opportunities to terminate the horrors. In 2012, there was an initiative from the Russians, which was not pursued, so we don't know how serious it was, but it was a proposal for a negotiated settlement in which Assad would be phased out. Not immediately. You know, you can't tell him, we're going to murder you, please negotiate. That's not going to work. But some system in which in the course of negotiations he would be removed and some kind of settlement would be made. The West would not accept it, not just the United States. France, England, the United States simply refused to even consider it. At the time, they believed they could overthrow Assad, so they didn't want to do this. So the war went on. Could it have worked? You never know for sure, but it could have been pursued. Meanwhile, Qatar and Saudi Arabia are supporting jihadi groups, which are not all that different from ISIS. So you have a horror story on all sides. The Syrian people are being decimated.
And the U.S. now is sending 400 more troops to Syria.
Mm-hmm.
But if
I mean, it's just disgusting. I mean, I'm not even going to listen to more of that fucking Noam Chomsky, but it's interesting because Noam Chomsky is actually one of the people who got me into the left originally. I think he has good critiques of like mainstream media and stuff, but ironically now he's just parroting all that, and he's just telling all of us straight up to our faces that hard line approach that you were talking about, Nick, of like that Trump nationalism, right wing brute force. That is not as effective anymore. What's more effective now are color revolutions, social media campaigns, the quote unquote Arab Spring. And what's your reaction to Noam Chomsky and Democracy Now! And the synthetic left support for imperialism?
Yeah, well, I guess first off with Democracy Now, it's really amazing that, you know, you look at the media landscape in the United States right now. It's pretty amazing because if you think back to like the time of the Iraq War, 2003, and going a little later into later years of the Bush administration, if you were to say that you would have someone on Fox News who gives more of an anti-war perspective than Democracy Now, that would be insane. And you look at Tucker Carlson. Now, there are a lot of problems with Tucker Carlson. He puts out a lot of really stupid stuff, but he does actually have on like anti-imperialist people on his show. He has like Jimmy Dore on and other people. He has like actual communists on. He has actual anti-imperialists on his program, and he like lets them give their message, and then he says he basically agrees with them, which is pretty amazing. While Democracy Now, on the other hand, at this point, supports basically every war. They supported the overthrow of Libya. They supported the destabilization of Syria consistently, the attempted overthrow of Syria. They supported the overthrow of Ukraine. They put out anti-Venezuelan government propaganda. Like they've spread propaganda like against the Venezuelan government. I think I would have to double check this, but I'm pretty spread propaganda against Evo Morales
Yeah.
back in 2019 when the U.S. overthrew. I mean, that's how extreme it is. They've supported every single U.S. regime change operation around the world since Obama came in, and it's pretty amazing to think about. It's pretty the way these things have shifted. It's pretty shocking. But Noam Chomsky, you mentioned like his earlier work and how he does have some good work. I agree. I think a lot of his earlier work, especially manufacturing consent and stuff like that, is very useful. But it's again so ironic because basically he's turned around and has been manufacturing consent for the U.S. government, which is what he was against before. He's basically manufacturing consent for people on the left to support U.S. imperialism in Syria. He's gone so far as to say that he opposes U.S. withdrawal from northern Syria on the grounds that it would harm the Kurdish self-described anarchist groups there that have been collaborating with U.S. imperialism, that have opened the door for the U.S. troops to occupy the area. That's another interesting thing. But yeah, it's really strange how these people who were very well known during like the Bush era as being anti-war are now basically pro-war, and it goes hand in hand with there was like this shift that went on during Obama. There was this going on, and at the same time, the sort of the push for U.S. imperialism was this color revolution, soft power overthrows of these governments. So it's easier for these people who are supposedly on the left to give a left justification for U.S. imperialism.
Yeah, and we saw that happen during our lifetime, which I think is really interesting. Shout out to everybody in the chat: Spencer Richards, Dust James, Bone Dance. Dust James said, "Should be imperialism now. The international coverage is horrible." I agree. It's that's a great name. They should rebrand. You know, live from Wall Street, imperialism. You know, Orlando said his manufacturing consent is still a classic text, but yeah, we shouldn't just blindly support him on all fronts. Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's just like his stuff is totally, he is literally manufacturing consent. I think that's so ironic that he wrote that book and now he's doing that very same thing. So going into a little bit about the history of Baathism, because I think like one of